Okay, here we go.
We are going live via satellite to Mr. Morgan Day from Blizzard in order to talk a little bit more about it. Welcome, Morgan!
Thanks for having me, man. Yeah,
Lead encounter designer.
One of the things I'd really like to start off with is one of the most impressive things I've done so far in Shadowlands, which is Torghast.
Yeah, Torghast is great.
Already a piece of content that I could see most of the player base leveling alts just to play Torghast. Like, was that an intention when you started it?
I'd hope so.
You know, that was absolutely something that we discussed. I think the main goal with Torghast, like we've talked about, was just let's create a piece of content and, you know, maybe even a game mode that we haven't seen in World of Warcraft before. And, you know, that's one of the great parts about working on WoW is the possibilities are endless, and something that we're always inspired by is just games that we're playing ourselves. And, you know,
so they stole the idea.
Genre has become a lot more popular recently, and we're all playing them ourselves. And, you know, we
yeah.
were given the opportunity to say, like, hey, what would be a fun, you know, new game mode or feature? You know, we had, Islands or Warfronts and Battle for Azeroth. So when we were talking about Shadowlands, you know, this idea of Torghast came up because, you know, from early inception, we knew the Jailer was going to be a big part of the expansion. And we had these amazing concepts of the tower. And we're like, I want to climb that. And what kind of game mode would work best for that? So
I do feel like Torghast, the fact that it's a new game mode is what's probably so compelling to most people, because it's a way that they haven't played WoW before. And I think that's why so many people like it. So I'm glad that they're taking ideas from other games and trying to incorporate them into WoW.
You know, we really just have been focusing on making the most fun, exciting, replayable experience that we could. And, you know, based on the feedback you guys have been giving, I think we're on the right track there.
Oh, absolutely. Like, I've logged in and played it so much off stream, you know, not just for content creation purposes, just for fun.
Yeah, totally. I saw you were checking out the Druid because we just, you know, recently came up with some of the Druid anima powers, and I saw you were checking them out today.
Yeah. Now, one of the hard things it's been, certainly from our point of view, while we're dealing with a lot of guys who want to know more and more about Shadowlands, is that as far as I'm aware, everything we're testing with Torghast is not what it's going to be on live. And we're trying to communicate exactly what it is. So what I was really hoping you could do is paint a picture of the live version of Torghast from like a casual player perspective, all the way to the guy who loves Torghast and wants to do it all day, every day. What is that going to look? Because we do know it is a mandatory piece of content.
Okay.
So paint a picture, right? Like with pretty trees and
I would love that. If you want to whip paint out.
Why the fuck are there going to be trees in Torghast?
Put on my wig.
The hell?
Right. So that's a great question, actually, and it's something that is still evolving, right? The question of depth versus breadth of engagement is a really interesting topic, and it's something that we've been talking about a lot, especially considering, you know, what you're discussing, which is just how much fun it is to just get in there and play it. So for, you know, your point about, you know, someone who is maybe doesn't play as often as someone like you might, one of the things with Torghast that we're really excited about is, you know, this is a piece of content that scales from 1, so you can play it solo, all the way up to a full party of 5.
I don't know how the fuck they're going to balance that. We designed
Horrific Visions actually with Torghast in mind in that regard. We really wanted to experiment with this idea of this, you know, piece of content that worked as a solo.
So there it is. Everybody was wondering if they basically used Visions as a beta for Torghast. Apparently they did.
Experience or with a full party or anywhere in between as well. One of the things that we, you know, learned early on from Horrific Visions was just kind of the tuning, what was and wasn't working there. But also we have been discussing the, you know, rate of engagement, how much you can actually play with Torghast. And initially we weren't actually planning to come out with a mode or a version of it where you could just kind of play it, you know, for 8 hours a day straight, like you said.
So are they going to do that now?
Based on community feedback, based on stuff that you have expressed yourself, we want to revisit that. We definitely think there's a ton of cool opportunity there to come up with something where, for someone who wants to play it as much as possible, they can engage with it without, like one of the keys that you need for Horrific Vision, or a key that you would need for one that might provide you with, your currency to build your legendary.
What do you guys think about that? I worry that, like, I'll be honest, I don't know if that's a good idea. I know everybody's saying it's a good idea. I don't know if it is. Because it's always an unpopular opinion to say not to give something to players. But don't you worry that players will burn themselves out if they can just do it as much as possible? Because that's kind of what's happened with Mythic Plus. I don't know. Like, that's a concern for me. Torghast is all I want to do. A lot of people saying Torghast is all they want to do probably haven't even played it before. Well, let's see how he explains it.
And we think there's a ton of opportunity there. It will likely, we haven't fleshed out the details, but one of the things that we've been discussing is it would likely turn into something that looks more like a mage tower, where it's more for prestige and the rewards are cosmetic. You know, we would keep that mode separate from the mode that would require a key to come into.
That is really cool.
And, and as we've talked about, access to Torghast, we want to feel like a function of how much WoW you're playing for the runs that might be, you know, finish this floor or finish this wing of Torghast, and you can get your currency for your legendary crafting. Right. We want the access and the amount that you do that to be a function of how much you're playing. It's not too dissimilar from what you're seeing with Horrific Visions, where you know you kind of get one a week for free, and then as you engage more in certain other types of content, you're provided with more keys to run.
Shitty dailies.
So we've learned a lot there, and that's kind of the what we're thinking about right now.
No, I like that.
Let me hear what Preach says.
So there's like going to be almost a mode which is, this is where you get your legendary stuff. This is, you know, the kind of thing you need to do, or you'll want to do on your reset, or at least once a week. But also, if we want to push for cosmetic things, we can literally set aside a day. We don't have to worry about farming keys. We don't have to worry about getting prepared. You know, with like Horrific Visions, everybody needs to have access, otherwise you can't do it. So now we can say, come on, whichever character you want, and we're going to just go for a long run, which I know in Tali's interview.
So the cosmetic progression would be infinite. Like, you can do it as much as you want, but the gear-based progression is finite. I feel like that's as good as they can do. Like, that's the best middle ground they can reach. So I as I said, I still am worried that people are going to burn themselves out doing it, but I mean, for how many people disagree with me on that, maybe they're right. Maybe they're right about just letting people try and do it as much as possible, because Blizzard has tried to limit and time gate things a lot recently, and it's been to a lot of the players' dislike. You know, people haven't liked as much time gating now, or ever really, but especially now. And so maybe they can try this different direction and see what happens.
It was mentioned that maybe, you know, the expected mandatory time would be about 30 minutes, which I guess would be about floor 12 based on what we've seen now. Whereas in this longer version, you can stay in there until you get overwhelmed, I suppose.
Yeah, like I said, we haven't completely nailed out the details there. I don't know that it would be quote unquote endless. We're still trying to figure that aspect out. And yeah, like you mentioned also in terms of it feeling or being a required mode, I think, you know, we've talked about this being the place where you're going to get your legendary. So if you're a person who, you know, maybe you're looking at Horrific Visions as like, do I have to do this as much as I do Horrific Visions? With Torghast,
probably
legendaries are going to be unique equip 1. So if you're someone who you know wants to do a couple runs and then get your legendary, and you can have the one legendary that's like, this is the one I wanted, cool, I can be done with it.
So you only can have one legendary on. So I wonder if what they're going to do later on in the future is make it to where you can equip more and more of them, which I think would be kind of cool, but I'm curious if that's what's going to happen. Because that's kind of what they did in Legion. Remember back in the very beginning? Yeah, in Legion, you could only equip one, and then they made it to where you can equip 2.
But at the same time, you know, the goal is just to make it as fun as possible, and we want everyone to enjoy doing the content. I've been talking a bit about Horrific Visions, but it's weird to say, but I think Torghast actually feels more like traditional WoW gameplay, even though it is very inspired by a roguelike. You know, in Horrific Visions, it's very Lovecraftian, right? There's that like ever-present like you know, sanity drain, and it almost, you know, if you played any like Eldritch board games, it's like I'm losing, ah, sweet, I won, thank God, right? It's a very different feeling than what Torghast currently feels like. So
yeah, I'd agree with that.
You know, the main goal is just to make it as fun as possible for everyone.
Yeah, so far doing a great job, and it's again it's a mode I absolutely love. Moving on to it though, a lot of the powers we are seeing, like you said, you've added some mage ones, added some druid ones.
I hope he's going to talk about like the power growth and like the power creep in Torghast. That's, I think, really something they need to address.
Wide, which is having sort of a pro and a negative instead of we're not seeing as many spec specific ones. So in certain cases, certainly with the druid, which has 4 different roles, is a lot of them revolve around, say, Moonfire. And we're not seeing any crazy bear things. We have seen Growl being a DPS cooldown, which is fantastic. Yeah. Are we going to see more of that? Is that something that's ongoing development, or are we expected to see it be more class-based and covenant-based?
Right. So like you mentioned, actually the Growl one is a great example. We can run with that. But, one of the main core goals of Shadowlands and some of the philosophies, Brian has talked about was bringing class fantasy back. We really wanted to try to keep the focus on the class itself. There's a lot of reasons for that, but to your point of like having these anima powers feeling distinct and unique per spec, I think even with them being class-wide, the Growl one is a great example where even though Growl is class-wide, as a Guardian Druid, you're going to look at that power and get really excited to see that. And I think there's also plenty of opportunities for any Druid spec to see that and be like, oh, okay, maybe I'll take that in this run.
I really like that. I like the idea of, like, as a mage, getting abilities that empower your Fire Blast as a Frost Mage, and empower your Arcane Explosion as a Frost Mage, because it makes you play your character differently, and it makes you play your entire class rather than just your spec. I really like the direction they're taking with this.
And you might prioritize that differently based on your spec that you're currently playing, but that's a broad suite of powers that you can kind of choose from, and the variance comes from run to run, maybe based on what your composition is or what your own personal role is. So, we think we can fulfill the same goals with making spec ones, but by keeping them class-wide, that one being a great example.
Okay.
That's good.
The last thing I kind of wanted to mention on Torghast as it's ongoing is, because Torghast is such a self-enclosed environment, right? It's in its own little bubble. Will you use this to test potential things for future outdoor content, world content, raid content? Is this a good place to actually utilize this place as a test ground for those and see how the population as a whole deals with them?
It's hard to say.
That's a really interesting idea. I hadn't actually considered that. You're basically pitching like, what if we did class design brawls or whatever, right? Like,
like
that's kind of cool.
What if we, you might come up with an idea and say, I don't think people are really going to like that. You could throw it into Torghast as a flaw, and
see if it pisses people off.
Okay, it's not worked out, or people give negative feedback just within Torghast. It's very much easier to remove that than say a boss encounter, right? So
totally. It's like a quite the sandbox where we can kind of experiment. And I mean,
it kind of is.
Thinking about this now, like, Overwatch is doing something similar with experimental modes right now. So that's a really cool idea and definitely something we could discuss. But, actually, to come to think of it, with that said, we are looking at some of the anima powers that we're creating in there to leverage as potential legendary powers that you can craft through running Torghast. And, this is, like you said, one of the main places where we can kind of take the...
That mage one? Where they summon the mirror images, and the mirror images are gods? That is awesome. And it actually makes sense, too, that you can infuse your legendaries with the anima powers that you get in Torghast because you're making legendaries in Torghast. It actually makes a lot of sense. It also seems really fucking OP, which is also probably why so many people are excited about it.
Gloves off, and there's no rules about balance. So we do need to kind of keep that in mind. You might not get it one for one, but... actually, are there any powers that like you have seen that you're like, oh my god, can I have a legendary of that, please? That won't break the game.
Then never mind.
I've got to be honest. One of the greatest things about Torghast is when you break the game. That's like the really fun part. But Invis being a DPS cooldown is really fun. Setting up for that because it's on such a longer cooldown.
Yeah, that is really cool.
You maybe get it once or twice per fight. I don't think that would break the game either because you can't really utilize any other spells within invisibility. You have to fire off that fireball, or you can't pair it up perfectly. I'm sure some scammers
it's like one big alpha strike.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you're going into a mega combustion or something along those lines. But if you can make
PvP also, I'm sure, or battlegrounds.
I mean, no one plays PvP, you know that. But
he just says it right to the dev, man.
Say Guardian Elemental to have permanent earthquake, that would be pretty fun.
Very cool.
Yeah, that would be very cool.
I don't know what to say.
All right. I'll pass that along if the combat guys aren't already listening.
Yeah.
And let's move on to dungeons just for a minute, because obviously you have fingers in so many pies. From the couple of dungeons that we've looked at, it looks like you've actively moved to reduce the length of the dungeons from what we've seen in BFA, which have some very, very long dungeons in there. Now, we have only seen 2 of them, so it might just be a coincidence that's popped out. I mean, we were just wondering, is that something you've actively tried to do, is to make them a little bit shorter and more even in length? Or will we see bigger dungeons later, etc.?
That's an interesting observation. So I wouldn't say that was a goal. I think maybe what you're seeing right now is the product of a couple things, potentially.
I think that they should make the dungeons a little bit shorter in general if they're made to be speedrun, because like a 40-minute dungeon speedrun locks somebody into their chair for 40 minutes, and I think that's just too long. It's too much of a time investment, and I'd like to see them like stop doing that and just make shorter dungeons if they want them to be speedrun. Now, I like longer, like, 8-hour dungeons. Like, everybody is nostalgic about BRD Classic, or at least a lot of people are. But if you're talking about for Mythic Plus dungeons, I think they should be like 20 to 25 minutes, and that's it.
For one, it's important to remember that these are level up dungeons. A lot of the, if you think back to BFA and Legion, a lot of the level up dungeons did tend to be a little bit on the faster side than, say, like, an Arcway or some of our, max level dungeons like Siege of Paralis. So that is a product of these being level up dungeons. That is part of the goal.
Okay.
It also might just be a tuning thing right now.
That makes sense.
So early in the alpha, just baseline combat tuning may be a little bit off, and maybe just, a standard dungeon trash pack isn't taking as long to kill as we might have expected it to. So that's not necessarily an intentional thing you're seeing. I am curious to get your take on that, though. Like, how have they felt? Like, have you guys enjoyed the length of the dungeons? Are they a little bit too quick for your
I'm not sure.
I like how short they are.
No, they're not too quick for my taste. I have fun, and I don't feel like I'm doing really long stretches of just trash and things. The pacing seems to be really good. So both of them so far have actually followed quite a similar formula, which has been the end bosses are really back-to-back. Which I enjoy, because you have to decide then, when are you using that Bloodlust? Are you going to use longer cooldowns?
You have to make a better
because
decision.
You're not going to have it for the next boss, at least till later on. But so far, the length has felt really nice. I haven't done. Right. There is only 2.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the shorter dungeons are much better, and they're more enjoyable in general.
I haven't felt any as dragged on.
Right, and this is funny because actually the next dungeon, Miss Tyrannosaurus, is going to be a 3-boss dungeon. It's our only 3-boss dungeon, so that one may be a little bit on the quick side as well. But there is a really cool...
Maybe that's going to come out today.
Get their hands on it. There's a really neat, unique trash section where there's actually a bit of a trickster boss, and he's kind of messing with you, and he's built this like misty maze that you have to solve puzzles to get your way to the boss, and then you use that mechanic on the boss.
It just reminds me of like remember the little imp you had to follow around in fucking Dire Mall? It's the same fucking thing in a way. Like, it just, I don't know. I'm really excited about this expansion, and I don't know. I really just hope that it's good. Oh, I just let the mount die. Fuck, who cares? I'm very excited about it.
The main goal with our dungeons is always to provide as much variety as possible. Where some people really do like the those 5-boss dungeons that are a little bit longer, and we totally have a max level dungeon this expansion that is 5 bosses. I forget the name of it off the top of my head. You could probably open the DJ and check it out, but
yeah.
That is the goal, right?
Sorry, I'm pausing again. I think really, I think a variance is good. Like, I want to see a variance in dungeon lengths. I think it's okay if you have a 15-minute dungeon and a 30-minute dungeon. And if there is one long dick dungeon that takes an hour, that's really cool. But I think most dungeons should be short. But I do like 1 or 2 long dick dungeons.
Make sure there's variety there. And we don't have too much variance in terms of the time it takes. We always have that. You should be able to run through a dungeon on your a queued dungeon experience on your lunch break, and making sure that we don't get too far out of that band is important.
Well, one thing that's been pretty clear is how creative you've been with the dungeon boss mechanics. Even just looking at the Necrotic Wake, we've got the you're being teleported, and we've got a gauntlet.
Walmart
in there. We
content.
Have obviously Surgeon Stitchless.
McDonald's content.
With the harpoon mechanic, which is definitely catching a lot of people out, and managing the
that
ads
fucks
on
people.
the first boss as well. So it's nice to see that the dungeons aren't sticking. I haven't seen anything that's been kind of like, okay, this boss doesn't do anything, which is always great to see in dungeons.
And yeah, Theater of Pain is the name of the max level 5 boss dungeon. Thanks, chat.
That is an edgy name.
I like that. Right?
Theater of Pain.
I mean, we joke about it, but like Maldraxxus, every time we talk about that zone, we're like, this zone is so metal. Everything about this zone is just metal. So I mean,
I wonder if they're gonna do the Theater of Pain. What's the first thing you think about Theater of Pain? Well, what are synonyms for all of those words? Amphitheater of Anguish. So that was back in fucking Wrath of the Lich King. Is Theater of Pain just gonna be 5 bosses? Yeah, and then before that, Ring of Blood. So I'm really hoping that like maybe they just do something where you have a dungeon. Imagine if there's a dungeon and there's no trash. It's just 5 bosses. Like maybe that would be too OP for loot, and like everybody would only want to run that one dungeon. But in terms of like speed running that, imagine how badass that would be. Like you speed run a dungeon of 5 bosses back to back. I don't know. Like just thinking about that in terms of like a speed running perspective is really cool. And each boss has like different things you need to overcome. TOC?
Even the names of it, when we go to name it, we're like, okay, is this metal enough? I sure hope so.
Well, I hope one of the bosses literally has a guitar that he's beating you with. That would be perfect.
Yeah, there
you
you
could
go.
get that going. There's an entire council boss that's a band. You know, he's banging you
No
with his
bosses,
drums.
just get the loot.
We have that in the Dark Moon Fair.
Yeah,
I guess we
would have seen the hardcore
maybe make
version.
that special appearance.
Yeah, for sure. I just thought the last note really on dungeons, because we've only got 2. I don't want to spend too much time on them. That we saw in BFA, because we carried over a lot of the Mythic Plus affixes from Legion, is that some of the dungeons didn't play particularly nicely with them.
No, they didn't.
You know, you got like Waycrest with Sanguine. It was kind of messy for your
dog
average group.
shit.
Is that something you guys have taken more care of this time, or is it just sometimes that's the way it's going to be for the sake of creating a good, interesting dungeon?
Interesting. Right. So, do you have other examples there? I'm curious to hear. Like, obviously, yeah. As soon as you were talking about this question, I was like, yeah, Sanguine in Waycrest Manor can get pretty rowdy. But were there other...
Here you go, Morgan. Number 1. How about in BFA, they have like 8 different fucking mobs that stand still and cast an uninterruptible action. How the fuck are you supposed to deal with that whenever you've got Sanguini under their feet and they're healing up? You have it happen in Tol Dagor? What happens whenever it happens in front of a door in Tol Dagor? Well, then you're fucking mad. You're sitting around there. Obviously, you can outplay it, but for most people, it's just fucking annoying. Like, there's 1,000 different ways that the BFA fucking mechanics... Oh, wait, you've got one guy, and he's got, like, a bunch of non-elite mobs. The health pools are completely different variables, so you have to individually kill each one so you don't bolster each other, and it's a pain in the ass. No, it's fucking annoying. Like, there are 1,000 different things in BFA that don't work with the Legion affixes. I don't like it at all. Do not like it. Get good. Listen, if a affix combo creates an unfavorable or a frustrating outcome for 95% of the player base, I think that affix combo should be reworked. Getting good is a good idea, but it should not be the only solution.
Other examples that you felt?
Yeah, certainly when you're dealing with bolster, is there are a lot more packs that seemingly have an extremely high health enemy and then surrounded by very low health enemies.
He's so
happens
smart.
Quite frequently in certain dungeons.
There it is.
What we see often in live, and certainly at this release of a new season, is that some people will say a 15 of this dungeon is harder than doing like an 18 of another because of the affixes, you know, and people start getting a little bit. They look at getting their key that week and go, well, that's a dead key, because of maybe how the affixes work within that dungeon.
Yeah, I mean, we want to try to avoid experiences like that, right? Like we want there to be texture from week to week with the affixes, including how those affixes interact with each dungeon, right? So like if Waycrest Manor is a little bit harder this week than it was last week, we think that's actually really valuable for the system as a whole, and maybe we'll change the decisions that you make in terms of what dungeon we want to run. I think we run into problems when there's too large of a delta there. Like you said, like if I can't do a key that's 4 lower than I did the previous week because of a specific dungeon or affix problem, yeah, that's something that we should look to address. You know, our goal always with Mythic Pluses, or Mythic Plus affixes rather, is you know, to add variety, to make sure that they are evergreen and that they work in each dungeon.
They're not evergreen, they're nevergreen. So listen, here's what the problem is. every affix makes the dungeon take longer and is more boring. The only good affix, in my opinion, is probably, you guys like Nevergreen? The only good affix is teaming, because it makes you do huge fucking AoE pulls. It makes it more fun. It's cooler, right? All of the rest of the dungeons and the fucking affixes just make shit take longer. Like, Volcanic is kind of cool. Reaping was really cool. Like, I don't know why all of the affixes are built specifically around just making things take longer. I like being able to run in there, do big-ass pulls, and do crazy shit. And if you're racing against an infinitely scaling system, why make the affixes a pain in the dick? Because people are going to hit the wall no matter what, because they're just playing against an infinitely scaling mechanism. So at least make the affixes more fun to play, to where people don't decide, what do I get to play with today, rather than what do I get fucked in the ass with this week. That's what it is. It's like, I look at the Mythic Plus like, all right, what's going to fuck me this week? Shit, we got that one again. Okay. It's never a perspective of enjoyment. It's always frustration and, okay, now I've got to deal with this too. And I think that's a big problem with the Mythic Plus affixes. They don't have to be negative. It's an infinitely scaling system. There's no reason for them to be negative, or at least not in the same way that they are, as just throttling mechanisms to make the game take longer.
And feel differently through each dungeon. And you know, we always have some rough edges, but we try to nail those out and get those resolved as quickly as possible. I'm
Seed
sure
of the Triumvirate.
God, what was it? The Blackrock Hold Gauntlet with Necrotic.
Yeah.
That was challenging. You know, we had a chance to fix that.
It wasn't that bad.
I think something that I can say we know we can improve on and do better is with Battle for Azeroth, we're introducing the idea of seasonal affixes.
Okay.
And we actually held the Mythic Plus system
Thanks for 5
as a
subs, man.
whole back until we had that seasonal affix online, Infested. That was what it's called, right? Infested? Yeah,
yep.
Infested. And I think, you know, with Shadowlands, that's one of the takeaways is if we don't have our seasonal affix ready, we can totally still enable Mythic Plus, you know, once the max level loop is turned on, once a lot of those max level activities turn on, we can also turn on Mythic Plus, even if we don't have all the new affixes ready, just because of things like you said. It'll be good to find those, you know, kind of rough edges with some of the dungeon affix combinations if those pop up.
Oh, excellent.
I think that I liked Reaping, but I think Awakened is the best affix that they've done this expansion, because it changes the way that you do the dungeon. Awakened actually makes the dungeon more dynamic, and Reaping just was a big AoE fest. Like, Reaping was awesome, AoE fests are awesome, but Awakened is actually a brilliant mechanic. Like, whoever thought of Awakened is a genius. Like, I really like they solved the problem with the rogues and like the stealth classes. It's like in all of these different ways they made it so much better. Like, Awakened is a brilliant affix, and I hope they keep using it.
Now, this is very early in this process, but I do have to bring up raiding, certainly having you here.
Thank you very much.
Castle Nathria is the raid we're going to be getting. 10 bosses to kick us off. And like I brought up at the beginning, in your interview you did on Tomb of Sargeras, you talked about using the environments that the guys create in order to try and work it into the mechanics of the fights.
Yeah,
absolutely. And you used Maiden, actually, as the example, using the hole in the middle as becoming part of the fight, which was really, really good.
I really liked how they did that. I think, obviously, the best example of Tomb of Sargeras with that is the Avatar fight. I mean, like, you look at the Avatar fight, and the entire room and everything about it is a mechanic in itself. And Maiden is too, but I didn't like Maiden as much. But like, they did a great job with that in Tomb of Sargeras. Even with Kil'jaeden's platform, it became a mechanic as well. Blackhand, etc. Yeah.
So I'm wondering, for Castle Nathria, we've got DDR bosses in there.
DDR.
We know that a certain old face has yet again managed to make his way back into another setback. Another setback. And the big beefy-chested Denathrius, I think is his name, is going to be making an appearance. But have you been able to do that in Castle Nathria? Anything you can tease us on maybe something interesting happening there?
Okay, let's see it.
Are we going to see Queen Ashara hiding behind pillars, which maybe didn't quite work as well?
There are actually quite a few examples where we're trying to incorporate the environment. I think philosophically, I'm obviously a huge fan. I often would do that myself. But philosophically, we really just want to do that where it makes sense and where the environment lends itself to that. If we did that on literally every encounter, it wouldn't be unique.
It would be
special
forced
anymore, or just kind of become
That's
the
smart.
norm. But I should have asked before. That's fine. Spoilers. For the Denathrius encounter, like you mentioned, if you look, I think the DJ is kind of work in progress right now, but there's a ability during the intermission where it mentions falling to a new floor. So that will be an encounter where the environment very much is a big part of the encounter, and it is also a multiple floor fight.
That's really cool.
To what you might have seen
Mr. Blackhand?
Blackhand's an example. Avatar of Sargeras is another example.
Okay.
We don't often get the opportunity to do that. We usually want to make sure that it makes sense for the encounter and it'll fit. But this felt like the right time for that. So absolutely, yeah, that's something that we always look to try to incorporate where we can.
Oh, super.
I love Blackhand. I thought that was a really cool fight. I just want to see fights. I guess one thing to me, it sounds like maybe weird to some people, but I really like whenever fights occur in outdoor areas in the game itself. So, for example, how like the Gul'dan fight occurred like on the top of the Night Spire, or the way that, let's say, like the Frozen Throne is actually in the game. I just feel like it makes the fight itself feel more like a part of the world, and rather than like a removed experience. And so I hope they do that a lot more. Heimall is probably the best example I can give too, because Heimall is like an entire zone in the game that you can go to, but there's actually a raid that is in Heimall. And that's what I like the most. I just make it, it feels more immersive to me.
But well, thank you very much for that.
Matt, don't get mad at me. Sorry.
Nobody heard. It's fine. I won't tell anyone.
In
other interviews, again, it was been really interesting to me looking back on things you've said.
Freehold,
It was very clear to me that when you come to design a raid encounter or a dungeon, is that you look heavily into the lore for the inspiration as to why bosses are there, what the environment should be like. And Shadowlands is such a clean slate from the past of World of Warcraft. Has that been tricky for you, or has it actually been freeing to say, oh, okay, I could really go a little bit wild with this?
Interesting. Yeah, I wouldn't call it a completely clean slate, right? Like, while we do see a lot of new things in the Shadowlands, a lot of what we're seeing is also shares a similar family or ecologies to things that might look very familiar from Azeroth, right? So for instance,
the Dreadlords.
In Ardenweald, there are the Sylvar, which are creatures that are, that you will see in Ardenweald, but they also very closely resemble the Dryads that we've seen on Azeroth. And, that isn't a coincidence. That's something that we think a lot about in terms of where are we taking our inspiration from. And
I hope they explain that more.
Us to use that as a familiar fantasy, not only for the player, but also for ourselves, right? You have a
I really like that a lot. I don't think it's recycled content at all, guys. I actually really like it because it shows more of like the evolution of the way that the characters work. So I think that a really good example of this is the way that you can tell the difference between like one of the like a monster like Tectus and then like an Ogron, and the different like kind of variants between an Ogron or like something like Tectus and an Ogre, and like the differences between each one of them. I like that a lot.
Sense of what a Dryad does on
Azeroth,
so it's very likely that the Sylvar do things that are at least in the same ballpark as those guys.
Okay. And I
mean, the community also is really cool, really good at catching those links, right? Like, there's been some theory crafting on our boy Denathrius even about what his origins are and some of his backstory, and it's really fun to kind of see the community speculate about that kind of thing.
I can't
also
tell you
just
how,
even small speculation. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying I can't tell you how excited I was during Revendreth's story to figure out who the persecutor was. I forget the exact title that she has. We were all guessing who could this character be as we moved through it, and it turned out to be somebody we didn't know. I think she was called Grace, who murdered her daughter or something along those. Spoilers, sorry.
Damn, what a bitch.
All the way through that, we had thousands of people going, I'm pretty sure it's her. Like, I know the lore. I know where she's coming from. But we will see more of that with revealing who the past of these characters and all those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Sorry, with the raid, you mean, or
before he goes to this question, I just wanted to show you guys what I was talking about with the thing here. So if you look at this picture, it shows basically the way that like the mountains that look like Tectus turned into these light guys, which turned into the Grons, which turns into the Ogrons, which turned into Ogre Lords, which turns into Ogres. And I like how they kind of created this lineage and this evolution of the monsters. And I thought this actually added a lot of depth to like what they were showing in Warlords of Draenor, and I thought it was really cool. So I hope that they do the same thing with the mobs in Shadowlands and show the lineage and the way that that kind of happened into Shadowlands and how it came into Azeroth.
Just in general in the game, are we going to be encountering more open world characters, raid characters, dungeon characters you actually reveal? Because we have seen Bluther. We do know that he's there.
Oh my fucking god.
But characters who maybe have been transformed and they were actually somebody that we may have seen in the past.
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, or actually, you know, this question is kind of all about is while Shadowlands is very new in terms of a lot of the things and the story that we're exploring there, it is also, you know, one of the many, many afterlives of Azeroth, and we're going to see existing characters. We're going to get to revisit some stories that we maybe didn't feel like we had closure on, and Bluther is a good example there.
I did not choose that name.
Yeah, I don't.
It's not me.
We're just accepting it.
It's happened. It's nothing we could do now. It's over.
Steve's so mad at me right now.
Of course.
There is also more characters to come that we're gonna have a chance to meet.
I wonder like why you said many afterlives, because I thought everybody just went to the Shadowlands, but I guess not. Because I think that's what I kind of asked Nobble about too. So I'm curious if this is just like one version of it.
In the Shadowlands.
I would be remiss not to ask you this while I've got you. Is one of the highlight of my year every couple of times is the World First race, and I did talk to a couple of your guys at BlizzCon. Is Mythic only phases? I don't know what to bring it to N'Zoth, but they did express that because so many hundreds of thousands of people now get to vicariously experience those things at the exact same time as these guys.
Yeah.
That maybe you're more open to some slightly more extravagant Mythic only phases, certainly for the last bosses.
I hope so. That'd be awesome.
A thing or not really worthwhile?
Interesting question. Do you not... Okay, of our previous Mythic only phases, are there some that you would have considered extravagant, or do you not think we've hit...
I wouldn't consider anything basically extravagant at all in BFA. None of them were extravagant. The last extravagant one that we had was, you guys are saying it in chat, was Gul'dan. Gul'dan was awesome. Red Argus was boring. What was the one after Gul'dan? I don't even remember what it was. Yeah, it's like, 100%. Like, Garrosh was cool. Jaina, what was her special phase? I don't even know. Kil'jaeden? Did Kil'jaeden even have it? I don't think he even had one. It was just, he was really hard. That was it. Jaina was up. Yeah, no, she didn't. I would say probably the two best ones that I can give you in terms of mythic-only encounters, number 1, Gul'dan, number 2, High Imperator whenever Cho'Gall comes out. Those were the two best mythic-only encounters, and a lot of the other ones were just straight fucking trash.
The bar that you're really thinking about.
No, not all. Sinestra was an amazing experience.
Fuck yeah, dude.
To have that floor collapse and fall down into Sinestra's room and have that. Illidan, of course, at Gul'dan. Was an absolutely fantastic experience. It was one of the reasons I pushed again. I was kind of 50-50 on going hard at that time, and then found out that there was going to be this extra thing that Illidan was going to show up, and I was very much into it. Having Cho'Gall, it's selfish for sure, but I can only imagine casting the World First race and then seeing Cho'Gall come running through that door. Right?
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, you imagine you can imagine the resonating throughout the community of having that moment. Like you would, all eyes would be on that, even though realistically not many players will get to experience it.
I think that's okay. I think the mystery and I think it's okay if people don't get to see it themselves. To know that it's there in some ways is better than just making sure everybody gets to do it in a boring version. To know that it's out there waiting for you, I think is the coolest part.
Yeah, so...
it adds...
Sorry, I was...
It adds another level to the game.
To answer your question correctly, so I was asking, kind of the follow-up. But, I think I personally think mythic only phases are really, really cool, especially when we have that cool story hook. Like the Cho'Gall example you just used was a perfect example, and it really, when we sat down to discuss, like, okay, cool, well, what's the mythic for this fight? It just kind of made sense. It didn't feel forced. You just completely, like, everything clicked. Like, oh, of course, Cho'Gall is here, right? So that's usually the goal when we talk about the mythic phases, or mythic end bosses, and what are they going to do? Is often the fantasy and the story helps inspire that, and we don't want to make them feel like well, we have to do a mythic only phase, because then it's not exciting, and it's not when you see it happen live on stream, like you said, it isn't a surprise at that point. You're just like, okay, well, what are they doing this time? So we usually try to make sure that when we do pull that,
I'm not sure entirely if I agree with that, but I think that to a certain degree it's true. And so an example of a boss that was incredible without a mythic only phase is Blackhand. Blackhand did not have a mythic only phase. He was just really ridiculously fucking hard. And that was one of the coolest fights ever. But I do think that a lot of the mythic only phases that they've done recently have not really been very good. So for example, if you had like Sargeras actually in the skybox and you were fighting Argus, that would have been way cooler than just Argus turning red. If you had, let me think, like, if you had N'Zoth play some sort of an influence after you killed Ashara and you had to fight off tendrils of N'Zoth or something like that in the Mythic Ashara fight, that would be really cool. There's a bunch of different ways that they could have done it, and I think that the problem is that they're too afraid of locking lore behind the Mythic only bosses, which I think in a way creates a very, very small, narrow thing that they can do, and it's just going to fundamentally be boring.
A card, I guess, that it feels appropriate and exciting when you see it.
No, I think that's fair.
And yeah,
you definitely don't want it to be like as standard. And the mythic only phase this time is X. What you want is that, again, like the Cho'Gall moment. You want to not know it's going to happen, and it makes sense and it's appropriate, not just trying to squeeze, because the quality would go down if you're just squeezing it in all the time.
Yeah, the N'Zoth one was awful.
Oh, absolutely. I think, I wouldn't say that we have ever said no more of that, right? It's more just a factor of where does it make sense? What is it?
Okay. So we need to move on to Covenant abilities.
Sure.
Okay, because this is obviously a hot topic, especially amongst the circles I travel in, and also a hot topic actually amongst the entire community. And when Ian spoke to Ted, my baldy brother, he did mention that the conversation about tying the abilities as part of your Covenant choice was internally being discussed still. There was back and forth there. We've obviously got to try out at least 2 of them for each spec now. And we are seeing the divide we expected to see, where some feel clearly superior to others.
Yep.
I'm just wondering, can you update us on where that conversation is
all right,
now?
Here we go, guys. Here we go.
And how you guys feel now testing's been done.
Totally. So I think... first and foremost, we really appreciate all the feedback that the community's giving us. This is something that, even as we discuss internally, and when we were talking about like, okay, so what's our next steps here? How do we want to approach this problem? One of the first things that we identified was, well, we just need to get everyone involved. We need to reach out to, guys like you and our community, and making sure that we've got, proper channels of feedback opened up, and that we can kind of discuss and identify some of the potential problems that you guys are talking about, and make sure that we ourselves feel like we have enough knobs to kind of tune it and make sure it doesn't feel like you're going to have a covenant that just feels like they're not as good as someone else here or there.
I'm sorry, guys. I think that the chances of them hitting this is 0. It is not 0.1, it is 0. And I really hope Blizzard proves me wrong, but I would rather them just fucking change it. Like, it is so knobs everywhere. Like, yeah, you're right, guys. Let's listen to everything that he says before we talk about it.
So the thing that I think is still important to talk about is that we're not done making stuff yet, right? Like with these covenant abilities, that's only part of the equation. We still have things that are yet to be seen and yet to be played by the community, such as our soul binds are still coming online, conduits are still being worked on, legendary powers are still being worked on. So we still want to make sure that we get all of those pieces into the community's hands, as quickly as possible. One of the things that we really learned from Battle for Azeroth that I believe Ian has talked about is just the earlier we can get things into your hands as a community, the more feedback we can get, the more time we leave ourselves for iteration. So we're still trying to get all that stuff online. The team is actively working on that stuff. And one of the things we've also identified is that conduits would be a great tuning knob to kind of provide certain class/covenant characters, unique benefits or bonuses.
I feel like they're trying too hard to make this work. It's like my opinion. I feel like they're trying way too hard to make this idea work. And I think that they should move away from it and try to do something else that's easier for them to deal with, rather than focus really, really hard on making their vision of the way this is supposed to function a reality, and try to actually just make something better for players in general. Yeah, I think they're trying way too hard to make this work, and it's just going to be a disaster. But we'll see.
So, like, if, for instance, if you've identified, hey, this, the Kyrian Warlock feels very single target, and I'm going to be lacking in AoE damage, we can create a conduit that will be specific to Kyrian Warlock that will make their AoE damage better in different ways, and that would be unique to them. Another thing is just being open to, the possibility of redesign or, tweaking or completely redesigning Covenant abilities when you guys have identified, okay, there's just way too big of a gap here. There's no way this ability...
What happens whenever they redesign it in the middle of a tier? What happens whenever they redesign it after people have already chosen it? Because that's going to happen. They're going to rebalance them whenever they're out. I feel like they're not even looking at the way that things have happened like this before. This has already happened with legendaries. This has already happened with Azerite armor. It's happened multiple times whenever you have players make a choice and one of them is better. People theory craft which one's better. Everybody picks that choice. It actually is worse than not having the choice at all. Being forced into the choice is worse than not having it.
With these soulbinds and conduits, is in the ballpark of these other ones over here. We're already making changes on that. Ashen Hollows, which is the paladin ability, is right. It's already something that we've looked at and have already made adjustments to that ability based on that feedback.
Yeah.
So that's just examples of things that we're still doing.
Okay.
And like I said, there's still a lot of new stuff coming online, and we just want to get that in everyone's hands with enough time to make sure that we can also iterate and potentially add new things if necessary.
Yeah, for sure. Like a lot of the conversations we've had away from maybe the public eye discussing this with a lot of people who are very contentious about the issue is that we will wait till we get that more complete picture before, because with some things, certainly I know I've personally been very outspoken about certain things. I was like, this is not going to work, as far as I feel.
Yeah.
And it's not that time yet until we do get this full package. So I'm wondering if you could, again, paint as a picture, if you could get paint out again. On day one of Castle Nathria releasing, assuming you stagger the release like you have done with every expansion launch in recent memory, what is our character going to look like? Is this a character that will have maybe a Covenant ability, a completed conduit perhaps, and a legendary item? Or what will that character look like and be geared as on day one? Of actual doing that, that season's content.
So, like we've mentioned, at max level, you get to choose the Covenant that you want to join based on, your level of experience. You'll have had an opportunity to play with the signature ability and the Covenant ability. And then at max level, you're asked to make a choice. And who do you want to join? At that point, you'll be granted those abilities permanently, and you'll be able to soulbind yourself with one of 3 soulbinds. And, as you gain favor and renown with your Covenant, you'll unlock further tiers of that soulbind. And I mentioned it's not in the alpha yet, but I'm pretty sure people have pieced together what those soulbinds look like based on data mining and things like that.
Yeah, so those are accurate. Sorry to interject. I'm just it was a big conversation we've had.
I'm sorry, guys, but I'm going to say it again. Blizzard has had a 0% success rate with systems like this. Literally 0%. So, I don't I really think this is just a disaster waiting to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to look at all of them, but that is the idea that is behind Soulbinds, and those things. It's very impressive the community tools and what people can put together. But for the most part, yeah, those are pretty spot on. Like I said, those are all still very work in progress. None of those are on alpha yet. Actually, speaking of which, something that to finish your question, and yes, Paul Cubitt mentioned that Torghast will be available basically as soon as our max level activities open up. So the expectation is hopefully you'll be able to have a legendary as you go into Castle Nathria as well. Actually, something I forgot to mention as we're talking about just what our next steps were, and in terms of, getting feedback from you guys. Yeah. Something that I think tomorrow even, we want tomorrow starting tomorrow with Torghast. When you enter it, they'll actually have all of the Covenant abilities available. Even if the zone isn't active. To the best of my knowledge, I think the way that's being rolled out is just basically daily. It'll say like, okay, today it's Kyrian, so anytime that you do Torghast, you'll have the Kyrian ability unlocked. Or the next day it'll be Maldraxxus. So even though Maldraxxus isn't available right now, we want to get those abilities out in front of players, get your feedback, get your thoughts, so that we can start that conversation, even though the zone might not be available to play.
So you're saying in the next few days we will have every Covenant availability over the next few days to test and play around with, including Ardenweald's and Maldraxxus.
I think there may be a couple holes here or there. I can follow up with you afterwards, and I can poke a couple people. There still might be a few that are still not quite done and ready for testing, but currently we had been holding the Covenant abilities until the zone opened up, but a lot of those are ready. So this week, all the Covenant abilities that are ready, when you go into Torghast, it'll daily kind of roll over. We call it a world state. So as the world state rolls over every day, it'll flip between Venthyr today.
What the fuck? I guess this is just for alpha.
Ardenweald tomorrow, Bastion the next day.
Yeah.
So then hopefully the next time the alpha is updated, that will be in the next build.
That is really exciting, and it's been. I know this is slightly off topic, but
yeah, I mean, this is just an alpha thing. I don't think it's BFA 2, okay? The problem, like, if Blizzard is going to listen to feedback and take that into consideration with what they're saying here, I'm completely fine with whatever this is. But my concern is that Blizzard is going to say, wait, we're not finished yet with the Covenant abilities, and they're going to wait so long to not be finished with it that by the time the game comes out, they still won't be finished with it. And then the raid's going to come out, and then they still won't be finished with it because they won't have any actual logs and parsing details. And then they'll have to rebalance it all over again in the middle of the first tier. And then it's going to piss everybody off. Like, this is, I don't see a world where this isn't a fucking disaster.
Compared to what we've done, I mean, I've alpha tested and beta tested now since Mr. Pandaria, I think was the first time. Well, actually, the Burning Crusade, but I didn't do it.
System of expansion? Yeah, almost.
The roadmap you guys have is so much better. Like, that it's almost like a completely different company this time around. Like, we know, as it is right now, that on a Wednesday evening, at least for me, there's going to be an update. And what steps did you guys take this time around to make it very unlike BFA, where we had almost no communication? We've already had so much feedback. We've got this interview, as well as many others that have taken place. How much of a priority was that to say, this time we're doing it like this? And how far ahead are you guys planned with rolling out of content?
Well, first of all, thank you. I appreciate it.
I'm amazed. I'm utterly amazed. That's not blowing smoke up your bum or anything.
Sure. But yeah, I mean, thank you very much, first of all. But like, we've said a couple times, that is by far the most valuable lesson we kind of took as a team from Battle for Azeroth. Was it's just really valuable to get eyes on this stuff, even if we're not, really 100% on the design of a thing. It's still valuable to get it out in front of you guys and just kind of get that feedback as early as possible.
Yeah, I agree.
Part of that was just coming up with the roadmap, like you said. Like, to your point, yes, we do have essentially the roadmap of cool.
You guys say they say that every time, But listen, guys, they've been doing that every time. They've been doing, not every time, but they've been doing that with BFA. Or not, with Shadowlands. They've been doing that with Shadowlands. They've actually gone out of their way and done a lot of these interviews. They've already produced more community feedback content than all of BFA had in its entirety. And it's not even in the beta, it's still in the alpha. They've done this already. It's not like this is a promise, it's what they've already done.
Here's this piece of content, it's going to come out on, you know, this alpha build, and here's where we're going to try to transition into beta. And we try really hard to hit those goals so that you guys have new things that kind of keep you coming back to the alpha and excited to look at. And that's been a goal, and it's glad to hear that it's working for you guys.
It's been night and day. I'm so impressed.
Yeah, it's great.
I got a message. I'll pass it along. Paladin and Rogue won't be available in that update that I was talking about.
Okay.
So the Covenant class won't be there either. Maldraxxus, Demon Hunter, Paladin, Night Fae are also not going to be there, but that's the only stuff that, you know, like I said, we're actively still working on these things. It's an alpha.
Well, that still leaves so much to do.
We mean that. Exactly. So that's still a lot more than you've seen previously.
Yeah, that is sure. I want to mix in your encounter design and, of course, your Covenant knowledge now. There is potential for some of these Covenant abilities to bring enormous levels of utility. And I'm not talking about the actual Covenant abilities, but more the Covenant-wide abilities. So, you know, Night Fae Blink, Venthir Teleport.
Yeah.
How does
the signature ability?
Yeah, the signature ability. How does that affect how you're designing some fights? Because obviously, if we take a fight like N'Zoth, if say DKs were able to teleport, you know, during fights like that would, and the amount of wipes that would have reduced having to deal with that fight is almost trivialized in a way. So, is that something you're actively thinking about now when designing fights? Is like, well, if people, and also we do run the risk, although it affects so few people, I understand that, of people actively having to have 4 characters to access this, because it makes the fights so much easier. Like, I can only imagine
I'm worried about that too.
Fewer wipes we would have had at N'Zoth if, say, our DK was any good, 1, and 2, he could have... It's true. And the ability to teleport out of some of those dangerous scenarios.
Toxic Dev laughing. I like it.
Yeah, that's actually a fantastic question, and something that I can't understate how often we talk about, both as an encounter group and the combat or class group. You know, I'm going to take it up a level here, just kind of high level philosophy, and explain
that's the stuff I love.
Our approach. Yeah, and I can just kind of explain what our approach to this is, because you're right, this is a very real problem, and it can cause, you know, balance concerns. It can cause lots of issues. So you know, the simplest way I can think about it, and that we discuss it internally, is, you know, as a class designer, as a combat designer, it's our job to make unique and interesting tools that an individual class has, right? Like we talk about these strengths and weaknesses. We talk about like solving these problems, and it's our job as class designers to make cool stuff that the player then feels like they have at their disposal.
Fuck yeah.
And on the flip side of that, as an encounter designer, it's up to us to make interesting puzzles that the player can then use that toolkit to solve, right? So it's very much...
That's smart. I like that.
A collaborative effort where it's like, cool, what does the class have to work with right now that I can create an interesting encounter or design that they can feel really smart in using those tools to help defeat this encounter. So that's kind of like high level how we think about that. Like, you give me the tools and then I make the cool puzzle. Where we run into problems with this, like you're talking about N'Zoth, for example, I think that's you know, that's kind of a perfect storm of several things, and speaks to just mages being really strong in that encounter, for one. But it also, you know, where we run into problems is when we don't create enough variety in the puzzles within an encounter. Actually, funny enough, here, I'm going to share a story that no one's heard before. Because it was before the days of streaming the World First race. So, you know, when I talk about this with the different groups, an example I often use is Heroic Ragnaros. So Heroic Ragnaros progression, I got to watch it because I was, you know, just kind of spying, but it wasn't streamed. So, but how that kind of played out was, in phase 2, there were these molten elementals, and the way people were dealing with it was they were just kind of balling up in a corner, and they were trying to burst them down as quickly as possible.
Yep, that's what we did.
So the raid was really, really heavily stacked with Balanced Druids,
Moon
and
Boys,
Frost DKs, and people that had really strong AoE burst damage.
The worst, how you know how I fucking remember that? Is because whenever my guild was progressing on Heroic Rag, the Moonkin that we had in our group was that Moonkin should be top damage on Heroic Rag at that point. She was bottom. She was so fucking bad at the game. I remember that every fucking pull, dude. She would just mess that shit up and die constantly. I was getting so mad. I finally got promoted up to officer and I kicked her out of the guild.
They then got past that part of the fight and they moved on to the next phase where there was a completely different puzzle that required different tools to solve. So when they got there, they realized, crap, we can't actually get past phase 3 with this comp.
Yeah.
So now we need to kind of switch our comp around a little bit to progress past that part of the fight. So, you know, it ended up with a lot of class stacking to solve specific problems because...
That makes sense.
You know, if the combat designers, you know, one of their main goals is creating clear strengths and weaknesses for classes. So if we're doing a good job there and you're presented with a problem that there's a class that's really good at solving that problem, if you stack it, it's going to be easier, right? Like, that's just how this works. But then the challenge is just making sure we're testing enough different things within an encounter so that by the end of the encounter, you end up with a fairly, you know, balanced looking composition, even though along the way, there was probably some class stacking to get past a few hurdles.
Yeah.
So I think probably the best example of a fight that's done this correctly is Li Shen. In Li Shen, there are a number of different things that like certain classes are very good at, but other classes can still do if they're played correctly. And I think that Blizzard should look at a fight like Li Shen and kind of base all of their design, if they want to kind of create like these different points of difference between classes inside of a fight, they should look at the way that Li Shen works and figure out how to make more fights like that.
No, that's entirely true. I think I did that progress myself. I was one of those Frost DKs, and by the time it got to the stage of balancing that comp, you're absolutely right. Even those classes had to push harder then, and let others take the lead a little bit, while you drop back into doing your standard stuff. And also the amount of utility there in the classes. I mean, Heroic Ragnaros is considered one of the greater fights, I think, because of that. Is that you had grips, typhoons, all those elements came in at some point in that fight to make a balanced comp and really showed off the strength of the individual classes. And again, it does kind of bring up, and we could maybe circle around to this as we talk about the classes in a moment, is that utility aspect, which is, we could talk about the good side on fights like that, but there's also the side where, you know, those classes that lack that kind of immunity, that kind of utility, certainly widespread utility, have been kind of seasonally benched. But I'd like to come back to that in a moment.
Like Warriors.
Possible.
Sure, yeah.
That's a very cool way of thinking about it.
I understand how it works.
Yeah. So, I mean, like I said, that's kind of high level, but I mean, the TLDR there is, you know, as an encounter designer, those things that you're mentioning, like, you know, the Venthyr teleport, that's just a tool in that person's tool belt. And now that I know that that exists, I can start to design cool things. I think even there might be opportunities, I think in the Nathria encounter that we've talked about a couple times where, you know,
yeah, but how's that going to be whenever you have like people, like if you design it for that, then you're going to have like that as a requirement. That's really, really dangerous. I need to take a piss, guys. I'll be right back. Sorry about that. I'm back, guys. Okay.
If you're Venthyr, that teleport might come in handy.
You're upsetting the mages though, because it can cross gaps. I'm just letting you know.
Yep.
The mages are a little mad that it's better than their blink. I'm just letting you know.
Blink. You don't like the twig on the ground? Like,
I like it. It's fine for me. Yeah, I'm just keep an eye on those mages. Just finishing up on the Covenant abilities then, as we are waiting for kind of the whole picture. So when the class has multi-role, so your druids that are tanks, healers, range DPS, and melee, and your shamans, which are the same, the range melee and a healer, it looks like you're having to create Covenant abilities that work for both healing and DPS. So if we look at Vesper, for example, weird. It's a healing DPS hybrid.
Like Crucible Flame.
How is this making it harder to create and balance those abilities compared to, say, Warlocks and Rogues, which all three of them have a DPS-centric Covenant ability for the most part?
Okay. It's a good question.
Right. That's a great question. I think the short answer is yes. Yes, it does make it harder to balance those. But
yeah, of course it does.
I think that kind of speaks to, you know, one of the high-level goals of Shadowlands and class design, like we've said, is we really want to try to keep it focused on the class. So when we were discussing these Covenant abilities, we wanted to make sure it worked for the whole class, no matter if they have different roles or different different specs that are doing different things. So as you're seeing, what that has kind of presented itself as is a lot of these hybrid type Covenant abilities are doing both damage and healing. We haven't really done
really hard
a
to
deep
balance
dive in terms of how we're going to be tuning that yet, so I don't have a great answer for you there. But I am actually curious, of those hybrid like abilities, like you were looking at the Druid today, which one of those do you think are working for you? Like which ones do you think are really cool? Like did you like the Vesper Totem or the Monk Weapons of Order, or are there things that are not working as well for you there?
I don't give a shit about some. I don't give a shit
with
about
the
healing
danger
abilities.
of sounding rude, and I don't want to do that. It really depends on whether the ability itself is fun to press, regardless.
I just want to attack.
So if you look at Vesper Totem is really nice because the great thing about Shamans is their immense utility. Certainly in a 5-man dungeon environment, they can do so much. And then when you throw down a Vesper Totem, which was really well designed so that you have 3 charges of DPS and you have 3 charges of healing, you don't have to choose either or, it kind of motivates you once you drop a Vesper Totem to do some healing, because you can put out this burst healing on the group.
Yeah.
And sometimes you are using that ability in different ways. Sometimes you're just going into an AoE pack, you're going to throw down Vesper Totem, it's going to pulse and do damage. Sometimes you're thinking, this pack's tough, I'm going to hold my Vesper Totem so I could do damage with it and throw out healing. And you're thinking that way as a healer from the opposite. I want to throw out my healing, but I'm going to put damage out there because it's also going to proc with Vesper Totem.
I always liked, for an example of this, what I really liked was Ancestral Guidance for Shamans. So this was back in Mists of Pandaria, where Shamans, even DPS Shamans, had an ability called Ancestral Guidance, and they would hit the button, and it would make it to where all of their damage returned healing to their group. And I thought that was such a cool ability because it allowed DPS to really just max fucking pump big dick damage and help the group get healed at the same time. And I think that ways that you can do that and give your DPS abilities to it, you still do. Well, I just remember using a lot of Mists of Pandaria. I don't know if they still have it now, but like in Mists of Pandaria, it was really good. I'd like to see more things like Mists of Pandaria, Elemental Shaman. I don't know if Enhanced had it, but Elemental Shaman, Ancestral Guidance. That was really fun for me to play.
If I look at, say, the Kyrian Kindred Spirits, awesome. I couldn't care less about that ability because I don't really know, I don't feel it in any way, shape, or form. And that's where the difference lies for me, is it feels, and this is why we wanted to ask this question, is with a Druid covering 4 different roles, is it seems like that has really hampered their ability to have a good Covenant ability, because it has to work for a tank, it has to work for a healer, it has to work for a ranged DPS,
that's a good insight.
It has to work with a melee.
So
what we've ended up with seemingly is Kindred Spirits, which is neither here nor there. And also we have I forget the name of it, but the Revendreth ability, which is also just lined up with cooldowns, essentially, because it makes your damage go higher, so you line it up with Celestial Alignment, you're going to line it up with Berserk, and it's fire and forget. And that's kind of the issue we wanted to tackle here is, are you feeling very limited because they have to work for all these different roles?
Yeah, I mean, that, to your point, absolutely puts some additional design constraints on them. There are a lot of different designs we could go with. And like I've said a few times, part of, the goal of coming out and talking with the community and putting up feedback threads and getting it in your hands as quickly as possible is just getting this feedback, right? And it's awesome to hear what you're saying right now with, hey, this feels good because of these reasons, and this is not so good because of these other reasons. So, that's absolutely something that we can look at, and we know we want.
That's why I try to talk about the things that I like, like the Ancestral Guidance back in the day and like other stuff like that, to like show Blizzard and tell Blizzard like, okay, this is what I enjoyed about the game. And so how can you put that in the game and like figure out different ways to incorporate that rather than just complain about shit? Or like how I liked Li Shen and like you could do spell reflection on Li Shen, and how different classes had to deal with the pushback mechanic, Helm of Domination or whatever the fuck it was, Helm of Command.
To take time to iterate on these Covenant abilities, where on the ones that we feel like aren't hitting the mark, as well as some other ones like Vesper Totem, like you might mention. So, I don't have here's the solution for you, but I think.
Oh, come on!
That's on the spot.
Fix it. I made a thread. Oh no, that's fine. Let's take a look at classes then, because I know we're kind of coming up against time here.
Okay.
I don't want Josh shouting at me.
Talk about warriors.
Is he?
So we've got on the classes
stuff.
So
warriors.
When I announced that we are going to have this interview, I had thousands and thousands of questions submitted, and they were all about
warriors.
Their class, their individual class, and we're not going to be able to do that. But there are definitely a couple I'd like to look at. There are a few classes that still, even after BFA, seem to be suffering from what we kind of coined Legion syndrome. which is by the end of the expansion, so the end of Legion, the end of BFA, these classes are so good they're a flavor of the month. And the greatest example I can think of right now is a Fire Mage. But they're so massively propped up. In Legion, it was with legendaries and their gear
the
there.
bracers.
And in BFA, they're propped up by corruption. They're propped up by Mechion bracers, a Shara trinket, and essences, which work super well with those. But similar to what we saw at the start of BFA is when you take all that end of expansion stuff away, they're almost fundamentally unworkable as a class. Their talent system, certainly for if we continue with Fire here, almost seems so locked in now for several years because the way you've changed Ignite to work now with Fire Blast, it feels almost like the class itself just doesn't work if we don't take Flame on.
Well, I think the problem, really, I don't want to interrupt too much with this question, but I want to say the problem with going from Legion to BFA is that there were so many different types of mechanical utilities that you had. It completely changed the way that you played your class. It's basically you were playing your class with 5 different tier sets at the same time. And the problem with that is that removing all 5 of them simultaneously just kind of left a bare bones class at the bottom of it. And I think that that'll kind of happen with BFA into Shadowlands too. So it's if you compare that from Cataclysm, from Wrath to Cataclysm, you didn't really have that as much. And I do think that's a big issue that they need to solve is making sure that these expansion specific empowering mechanisms either carry forward in some way, shape, or form, or that they don't have too many of them that compound on each other.
And similar with Arcane is there's just the talent tree feels pretty set because that's how Arcane works. I'm wondering, is something being looked at with classes like that, or is it a case of we know where these goes? Because we're coming back to that total package idea, aren't we? It's well, don't worry about it right now because pretty soon you're going to see the whole picture. Or is there something that's being done actively?
That's exactly what they said about Azerite.
Man, that's a super easy question to answer. There's a lot in there. Okay. All right,
I'm sorry.
No, you're good. I think it's a really good question.
There's
a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
I'll try to start from the beginning, like you mentioned, and I'll try to touch on the mage aspect in a minute as well. So I think Legion Syndrome, as you called it, I think that's a really good piece of feedback, and I think it is absolutely something that is real and something that I think when you look at the end of Legion, that was an entire expansion's worth of systems where we had updates to we called it the constellation of your artifact in 7.2.
Yeah, it was awesome.
The Netherlight Crucible in 7.3, and there was just a lot of things that we had kind of developed over the course of Legion, and with BFA we replaced it with the Azerite system. I think it's fair to say that the Azerite system didn't really do a good enough job shoring up the gaps that all of the things that you had lost from Legion. So it did feel you felt
that would be fair to say,
loss immediately, and I think that's something that we took to heart when we were looking to develop Shadowlands.
Yes,
and we really want to make sure that with things like the Covenant ability. The Covenant signature ability, Soulbind.
I hope they don't just get rid of all the BFA Azerite items. Like Test of Might, for example, as a warrior is really cool. I like Test of Might. Every Azerite ability is not bad because it's tied to a bad system. There are a lot of really cool Azerite abilities, and I don't want to see them just get rid of them and throw them all in the garbage because people didn't like Azerite armor as a fundamental mechanic.
Conduits, we're bringing legendaries back.
Inevitable Demise.
That's a lot of really cool
that was
stuff.
Cool
There's
too.
A lot of meaty systems there to kind of sink your teeth into and play with over time. And we think, even though Battle for Azeroth had, its fair share of problems, and we had to, add essences in the middle, and then we added corruption now as well. We were kind of layering systems on top of each other. Where Battle for Azeroth, we took a more Shadowlands, we've taken a more holistic look and tried to ensure that, coming out the gates. There's enough there to kind of prop that up. So that's, I think, the first part of your question. And to the second part, Mages is a great example of someone that we've gotten this feedback on before. We absolutely are listening, and we're trying to make changes based on that. We gave Touch of the Magi baseline. There's some mana return on Arcane Barrage, but we recognize that there's likely more work to be done there. Like I said, right now our main goal is get as much of this stuff in as possible so that you guys have that full picture. And then,
which I think is good.
While we're working
make sure people get the feedback.
Cool new stuff like these anima powers and conduits, you guys have a chance to look at some of the core class changes we made, and you can kind of compile the feedback there. And then once there's consensus and opportunity for people to sink their teeth into that, we can have the opportunity to then revisit some of those questions.
Okay, so just an ongoing process.
And that's something that I think is a good answer, right? I mean, obviously they need to have the players that see the system, and then that way people can give like genuine feedback about it. But the problem that I'm worrying about is the same thing that they did with Azerite armor, which is what I said earlier, is whenever they added Azerite armor, they said, oh, well, players don't see the full picture. They don't see the full picture. They don't see the full picture. And then finally, whenever the game came out, it's realized that players actually did see the full picture. They knew what was going to be, and it was what they thought it was going to be, and it turned out to be shit. So I hope they do this as soon as possible so people can actually give real feedback.
Did I get through? Yeah, did I get through everything? I don't even remember. There's a lot to that question.
There is no way we can make everyone happy here. We both know it, but the questions are worthwhile, I think, after testing all the classes out.
Cool.
I have to ask, Shadow Priest, when do we find something out that's happening there? We know you guys are aware of it with the issues with Shadow Priest. These are the kind of big hitters I wanted to talk about. Is there anything you can update us with there?
I don't have any updates today. I'll go with soon TM.
Okay.
I know it's definitely on our radar. It's something that we're discussing. But like I said, game development is just non-stop triage. There's so much
nobody
stuff
cares about Shadow Priest
work on and do, and it's just a matter of
Warriors are the only
what are we
class that
working on
matter
now? What's next? So it's definitely something that's on our radar. But the goal, as I've mentioned many times, is just to try to get all these new Shadowlands systems.
It is what it is.
Put together so you guys can see the whole package.
So we might see, just to alleviate people who obviously are waiting daily for stuff like that, is more class stuff. Once we've got the whole package, then we can start looking at the thing as what it's going to fully look like later down the testing process.
Yeah, because like we said, I mean, there's a lot that is involved in making your class feel really satisfying and fun to play. Not only just the core class stuff, but like you mentioned, there's essences, there's itemization, right? Maybe there's some items in the raid that are going to make a large impact on how you play your class. And we want to make sure that we're making these changes with that full picture in mind.
Okay.
I think every tier, this is like, Asmongold fucking game philosophy. Every tier, your class should play differently. Like every tier, it should play differently. And I think that the fact is that without fucking tier sets in BFA, it didn't. It felt like it played the exact same the entire way through. Definitely not. I'm not talking about completely differently. I'm talking about 10% differently, 20%. I think 20% difference between, like, maybe you pick two different talents. Maybe you use one ability more. Maybe you have a tier set that makes one ability that you have really powerful. That's why you pick the talents, okay? 20%. Okay, guys, if I have to put a number on it, 20%. Entirely different? I think entirely different was probably an overstatement. Yeah, 20% is a good number.
For that. Okay, the final question, I can see the time as we're here now, but the last question I would like to bring up here is, although Ted did ask Ian about this, one thing that wasn't brought up during that is the unpruning and the addition of new spells has made the GCD change a lot more prominent than it even was in BFA. In some cases where, like Enhancement Shaman, Arcane Mages, with the amount of stuff they need to set up to get going, it's taking an extremely long time. I know Ian said, it's going to case-by-case basis. So what is the best way of us dealing with that, and how is that conversation going on internally?
Okay, here we go.
You saved all the easy questions for last, huh?
I didn't know I'd get to ask you about covenants and classes, so it really went hardcore. Sorry.
Okay, here we
now
go.
you know I want the 24 hours.
All right, let's listen.
These are really good questions. It's important that we try to address as much of this as possible. So, okay, yeah, like you mentioned, Ted and Ian have discussed this a bit. Ian kind of asked for examples of, hey, can you tell me about which buttons still feel bad to be on the GCD? To the point that you were making, it sounds like you had a more specific point of, I'm pushing all these buttons back to back to back to get my DPS rotation going. I think we all agree that that's a problem, right? Like, there's no world in which we put these buttons back on the GCD, and the correct answer is, well, now I'm just going to take 6 seconds to push these
there is a
4
world.
buttons, and then I can start DPSing. Like, that doesn't feel good. I think we agree that's a problem. Where we maybe disagree is I don't think the answer to that problem is just pull them back off the GCD, right? Like, I think there's got to be a potential design solution there, or maybe there's some buttons, like you mentioned, that we should have left pruned or maybe not made baseline. Like, we certainly shouldn't be making...
Don't put that on me!
This is probably the same issue that I think I have. Should I actually listen to what he says? Do you guys want to just finish the statement before I say anything? Let's actually let him finish. Let's let him finish.
Preach says prune.
Yes, exactly. Preach says prune that again. So, we shouldn't be making that problem worse. Like, maybe, to use a specific example, since we're just talking about mages, mirror images as a DPS button. If the answer there is, well, I'm just going to put this in that line of things I need to push, maybe that shouldn't come back, or we leave it as a talent where it currently was. I think we speak again. I'll talk to the community for a moment here. I would love to see, what are the worst case situations? Like, where are the really bad outliers where it's like, yeah, I have 4 buttons I push. I think that's an area where we should at least start looking.
That makes sense.
And start there, and then we can try to look at the problem as a whole and get through.
I think we need to start like giving examples of that, and like tweet that stuff at Blizzard so they can see what the issue is. But I think almost all of the issues fall under the underlying problem of having to use multiple GCDs to empower your abilities. So it's like you need to have more than one setup GCD. I think you need 1 setup GCD, that's fine, but 2 setup GCDs is too much. That, in my opinion, is where the game starts to feel bad.
All of the problems, but there are likely outliers that are far worse than others, and I think that's important to identify which ones really have reached that point where it's like, yeah, I've got 2 buttons of like, no, this guy's got like 4 or 5. That seems more
That's extreme. Too much.
But I think we have more work to do there, right? We made a couple of changes during Battle for Azeroth. We made some design changes to Restoration Ascendance that I think felt really good. We added some immediate healing, and it felt really impactful when you push that button. And then,
well, I think the best example is Prot Warriors. Prot Warriors originally had Ignore Pain and I think also Shield Block, both of them on the GCD, and playing them was just, it was bad. It was bad. And then they took Shield Block off the GCD, but then they kept Ignore Pain on the GCD. Then they finally took Ignore Pain off the GCD, which is something that everybody had wanted, and the game actually felt playable at that point for Prot Warriors.
And maybe it didn't become the right design to push multiple cooldowns back to back in all cases. So that kind of helps to solve that problem. And I think there's certainly more work we can do there, and we can use the community's help in identifying kind of the worst outliers.
Yeah, just to quell the storm that's likely to come from this little bit is that we're not against the idea, because like mirror images as an example is one of the global cooldowns that's annoying to press during the ramp up, but mirror images is awesome. It really fits in with the class fantasy. It has a DPS role, it has a tanking role. It's such a cool button to press that we don't want to lose it either. So the door isn't closed to say, okay, few of these
I'll pause again. I have something in my head I want to say. So the reason why Blizzard wants to get rid of having multiple cooldowns used at the same time is because the cooldowns act as a force multiplier for each other, and they multiply each other's damage. So for example, you have something that increases your haste by 20%, and then you have something that increases your damage by 30%. You put both of those together, and you're doing way more damage than if you were just using one ability at the same time. And I think that's really what the issue is. So like whenever you had an Legion and like the Swifty one-shot macros, basically where you had like 5 cooldowns being dropped on top of each other, you had people's damage that just skyrocketed. And in like Antorus, for example, like so much of your damage, and Legion in a lot of examples, so much of your damage was built around just that window of your cooldowns. And they don't want to have that come back, which I think is good, but I don't think the solution to that is just adding more GCDs.
Else needs to come off the GCD. We know if the community is pushing very hard to say they love this ability, but it's annoying where it fits into how I play. That it can
and that's what I mean by like potentially even change designs of it, right? Like mirror images like if you think about the fantasy of mirror images, that
yeah, it's
acting
awesome.
as almost more of a survivability or utility button, like you could totally see a world where it fits into that role versus, well, I'm going to push this right as the same time I push arcane power, right? Like there's lots of design space there. That is a potential solution, right? I'm not saying that's what we're going to do, just more like this is a complicated problem and we know we've got more work to do, and it is a bit of a case by case in terms of, okay, what about this one? Does this still fit here? Does it need to be redesigned? Maybe maybe it doesn't.
Yeah, oh, that's understandable. Well, I'd like to thank you for your time, Morgan. That was amazing. I truly enjoyed it. I hope we didn't scare you.
No, man, it's awesome. I love that, and we should do this again sometime.
I would really hope so. Yeah, it's if we can ever get together to further down the line, because we still have several months, of course, before Shadowlands comes out live. I would really love to spend some more time with you to talk about these things, and hopefully we'll get to meet in person whenever we can actually do that again at some point in the world.
I'm allowed to leave my house.
Yeah, same. Luckily, I'm still working. It didn't hit me that hard, thankfully. Thank you very much for your time from all of us here. I think everyone really... I think people like that. I didn't actually have the chat open during this, but I'm hoping they enjoyed it. Sure. So thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, and honestly, man, thank you. As an influencer, as a contributor, as someone who's just loves to play WoW. You guys are the reason we do this. Like, I love WoW. It's been a passion for a long time, and just seeing you guys kind of engage with it and enjoy it, and the discussion that happens. It's so important to us to hear that. And that you guys feel involved in this process is a huge goal of ours, like you've been talking about. So thank you guys for everything you do. Thanks to the community for all of the amazing feedback and things that you've been passing along to us. You're the reason we do this. So thank you.
No, thank you, and thank you for. This is going to sound lame, but honestly, as somebody who really did not enjoy my time in BFA that much, Shadowlands has been everything I could have hoped you guys were making, and I genuinely mean that.
Awesome.
Like playing Alpha, so much more fun than playing.
It's a lot better
for me, so I'm a very happy boy. Thank you very much again, Morgan, and I really do hope we get to talk again. I'm going to move us to the background to say an actual goodbye, but thank you again.
Cool. Bye, chat.
Okay. Number one, I think the interview was really good. Okay, I'm going to give you guys the link to the video so you guys can go ahead and give it a like and give Preach your support. I think he did a great job with this video. All of the questions that he asked were relevant, meaningful, and they all kind of had, they were purposeful in the things that we like to talk about and think about. So I thought that was a very, very good video.